That's wonderful. And we're so happy to be here with all of you. What I think, as Ben has described, I'm going to start out with a little bit about my leadership journey, and I'd love for that to turn into a conversation and hear your questions. So there'll be plenty of time for that. And then we'll transition, and Jessica and I will do the case that we're really excited to dig into here a little bit. So Ben, anything else you want to say before we get going, or?
I think we're ready to go. This is really exciting. And you're our first speaker of the year, so we're really thrilled. So
that's great, because then I can just like set the bar. There's no one to compare me to. So, well, I'm really looking forward to this. This is my third year doing this with Ben, and I get so much out of it. I was really looking forward to hearing all of your questions, and even it's actually, you know, kind of a great introspective opportunity for me to reflect a little bit about my career journey, and so I've come at this a little bit different than the ways that I've described it for the past 2 years. So you're seeing kind of a fresh view. And it starts out with this picture. This is my 4-year-old daughter, Clara. Since the pandemic started and we've been at home, she's basically decided she only wears swimsuits and costumes, because why would you get dressed in real clothes? But the butterfly one has actually been kind of central to how I've been looking at this career journey conversation, and it's because of Clara. She told me that she learned something in school about caterpillars, and how when a caterpillar is ready to come out of the cocoon, that they eat a little tiny hole and then they push their way out of the cocoon, and then they're a beautiful butterfly, which we all know, right? But Claire, when she told me this, she got really serious and she said, but don't help them. Don't open that hole any bigger, because the caterpillar has to push their way out so that all the fluid in that fat caterpillar body gets pushed into the wings. And if you pull open and help them out of the cocoon, they'll never fly. And I maybe you've heard this story, but I had actually never heard that story. And I looked it up, and Claire is correct. That's how butterflies finally emerge into full, strong wings and can fly. And I just thought, learning that in 2020, which was kind of a year defined by struggle, is something that was an opportunity for me to think back about all the struggles that I've been through in my career, and how has that shaped me as a leader. And if I were in your shoes, earlier in your careers, what kind of lessons can I help impart for you, but also kind of get you ready for the struggle. And so that's what I want to talk about here today. And so I'm going to go through my career journey, but it's going to be kind of jumping from one crisis to the next. So kind of get ready for that. And the first one is actually, if you want to go to the next slide, Ben, I was pretty fresh out of engineering school. So I'm going to start out, this is August 14th, 2003. That's when this photograph was taken in downtown Manhattan. And I was an associate engineer working for Con Edison, who's the utility in New York City. So if this was August, I graduated in June, right? And one day working in our high-rise building in downtown Manhattan, the whole building goes dark. And we had lost power to the building. It turned out we'd lost power to all of New York City. And that was the first time it had happened, I think, in more than 25 years. And soon, it took a little while, but soon we learned that we'd actually lost power to 8 states, most of Ontario, and 55 million people were out of lights. And so here I am, brand new at an electric utility, and the biggest crisis in a generation that the utility has had to deal with. And the next, it was like 29 hours that it took us to bring power back to Manhattan. I think it was 36 or so hours to bring power fully back to New York. Those were incredibly formative for me. I mean, it's 20 years ago now, but I can relive those 29 hours here with some pretty good accuracy. My direct manager at the time, he ran the project engineering team I was working on. And he was already kind of a high-strung, easily angered, anxious kind of guy. So when we go into emergency, he jumps into emergency mode and he starts barking orders at people, and he sends me all over the building. So the elevators aren't working, but I'm going up and down the stairs of our high-rise building running all these errands, looking for, get this information, find this, see what this person's doing. And when I would bring him back that information, 10 or 15 minutes later, he'd dismiss it. He'd be like, oh, that's not relevant anymore. Or I already found out about that. And he'd give me some new assignment to do. And I'll tell you, it didn't take long for me to be like, does this guy know what he's doing? Like, what's the plan here, right? What's my role? Because I'm getting tired going up and down these stairs. And so I started to sort of question the next assignment I would get. I'd be like, is there another way? Do you need that? And finally, on one of my dead end errands around the building, I ran into another manager who said, hey, are you busy? Can you help me with something? And he had a very clear assignment. He needed someone to fill out a spreadsheet when people were calling in updates of field restoration. And I was the perfect fresh out of school engineer who could handle the spreadsheet to do that for him. And then I had a great experience and I learned a lot during the rest of the restoration and I felt like I contributed. And one of the big takeaways for me though was how much power a leader holds, especially in a really difficult time. The leader can establish an aura of calm and control, or a leader could spin everybody up and make things worse. And so having this experience really early in my career, really my first manager out of college, I think that has helped me to almost over-index on, I'm going to be calm in a crisis. And I think I have a reputation of someone who, it's hard to rattle me, we're going to get through this. This isn't the worst thing that's ever happened, even if it's actually the worst thing that's ever happened. But having that experience, being able to project that to the team. And I think of it when I do feel my heart racing or my blood pressure rising, I think back to that first manager I had, and I feel like I want to be like calm on the surface, even if I'm like treading water, kicking my legs underneath. And a takeaway for you as you're out there in the workforce, if you find yourself with a manager who is making things harder instead of making things easier, and that might even be in a day-to-day, not just in a crisis, think of it as an opportunity for you to be the one who's going to bring calm, control, confidence to the team. Be the one who maybe offline with your manager, work with your peers, remind them that, we can lower the temperature here. We've got this, we can do this, because people gravitate to someone who is going to help and have that confidence. My next story of 5 years later or so, I had finished my MBA. I did my MBA at night while I was working for Con Edison, and I was ready for a new adventure. I wanted to take all this new strategy knowledge and all of that. I want to take it out for a spin and go work for some, exciting global competitive company. So that's what I did. And I found a role working for Hess Corporation, who's a global energy company. And my job was managing project managers. And we were doing continuous improvement projects, and we were doing some really interesting work. So we were putting solar panels on gas station roofs in New Jersey because we were taking advantage of these really rich credits that New Jersey had put in place to advance renewable energy. I had a project in Europe to try to reduce the greenhouse gas footprint of the company because there were brand new regulations in Europe that the United States wasn't even debating at the time. And so it was an exciting job. I was also, this is pretty transparent conversation we're gonna have here today. I was pretty excited about the pay because I had been working for a utility, fairly compensated, no complaints. But with the offer I got from Hess, it was something like a 15% increase on top of my base, which there was no way I was going to get that, in a yearly increase at a utility. But when you add all the stock options and target bonus, it could have doubled my salary. And so this was exciting. I was fresh out of grad school and I was like having visions of having no graduate school loans in the near future instead of many years, which was my first plan. And I signed my offer and went to Hess in July of 2008. And if you had told anybody in July of 2008 what I have pictured here with all these headlines that came just a couple months later, nobody would have believed you. But this is, I think, another really formative point for me, because just a couple months later, we go through one of the largest market crashes in US history. And Hess started at the time, I think when I joined, their stock was $124. And 3 or 4 months later, it was in the 50s. Now, that meant for me, all of that upside in the offer had basically evaporated. Now, I was still getting paid more than I had get paid before, and I had all these exciting projects I was working on. And so I actually felt like I was really lucky that I was a new hire, because all of my colleagues were freaking out. They had college savings and retirement funds, and a lot of their personal wealth was wrapped up into a system that was crumbling. And what I witnessed firsthand is that when people are wrapped up in something that has such a personal impact on them, that they make riskier decisions. That they're focusing more on a short-term gain, a short-term price elevation, than the longer-term investment in creating value. And when you look at how much has or has not recovered, it's been 12 years since the crash, and a company like Hess still is not back to the prices that it was in the height of 2008. And the big lesson that I took away was evaluate opportunities. That's job opportunities or business deal opportunities based on what is certain, based on what you know now, and don't overspend or get wrapped up in the promise of some potential big upside. Make sure that you are going to be happy at the moment, at the salary, and not over connect your worth or connect your standard of living to this hopeful upside. And I think this lesson is really relevant today. I mean, first of all, the 2008 market crash was the biggest in US history until 2020. So that was now the biggest. But also, there are a lot of early and growth stage companies that are attracting incredible talent, like all of you, who are really, interested in trying to get people, the brightest minds into the businesses. And I absolutely encourage you, take those kinds of career risks early in your career, but make sure you're taking the role and you're taking, going to that company because you're excited about who that company is today, the role that they're offering you now. You're going to be comfortable at the salary that's on the paper and not the salary that's in the promise, because you can't get wrapped up in, oh, I want to be, number 7 employee of the next $1 billion company, or I want to join this company because I'm hoping they go public, because those hopes can evaporate overnight. And you want to make sure you're in a place where you're excited to contribute and you're excited to add value and you're excited about who they are today. So I'm going to go on to the next crisis. And this one is a few years later. So after I was at Hess for a couple of years, I followed, I was really excited about clean energy, doing the solar work and things like that I'd done at Hess. So I wanted a job and working for a company where that was their whole mission, not just kind of a slice of their business. And so I went to work for the New York Power Authority. And the New York Power Authority is the largest public power company. They own a quarter of the generation in New York State, a third of the transmission. They serve some of the largest customers in New York State as an ESCO. So like the subway system, all the airports, things like that. And it's an electric only utility with a clean energy mission. And I was really excited. So I joined them. I started out working, leading the renewable energy team, doing a lot of renewable energy contracts. And I got promotions while I was there. I was there for 8 years. So I eventually worked up to the point where I was the chief commercial officer. And that means that I had the wholesale side of the business, making sure that our power plants are making money, our transmission lines are in the markets. And I also had the retail side, serving the customer side of the business. And We owned hydro and natural gas and other renewable contracts, and a lot of the power plants we owned are actually right here on the river. So in the picture, this is Manhattan. The left side is the Hudson River. The right side is the East River. And all along the East River are power plants, actually. So in October of 2012, one of the most destructive storms in US history started traveling up the East Coast. And if there's something good about a hurricane, I guess there's not really anything good about a hurricane, but like one thing that's convenient about a hurricane when you're in an operating situation like me is you get some notice. It's not like an earthquake or even a wildfire that just happens. A hurricane, you get a couple of days notice. You see it, there's all these models, you'll watch, you get glued to the Weather Channel, and you don't know if it's going to hit you for sure, but something big is coming or it might hit you. So you've got to get ready. And so at this time, we activate a big emergency response. We call in extra crews. We start filling sandbags to build up the flood walls because all of our assets are right on the river. We get all the supplies. We start drilling and getting ready, right? And in a coastal area like Manhattan, you're worried about storm surge during a hurricane. And so storm surge is where the hurricane winds are actually, it treats the water as if it's like in a bathtub, and it pushes all the water to one side of the bathtub. And here along the river, you have like high water marks, and the record at the time of this is Superstorm Sandy, we had prepared where our power plants were for up to a 10-foot storm surge. And that record had stood since 1960. And so we fill our sandbags, we build our flood walls, we get ready. Once Sandy hits, it brings in a storm surge across this area of 14 feet. So our sandbags were pretty useless, right? We ended up having to evacuate our power plants. We took the plants offline, substations flooded. And what you see here in this picture is a whole section here of the southern side of Manhattan out of lights. So kind of back to the beginning of my 2003 story. And they were out of lights for days because of the damage to the underground equipment and to the substations that served in this area. So once the water receded, we got back in, we cleaned up, we got back online. But there were a lot of lessons for all of us through this catastrophe. And one thing that's true, I think, of most of these crises is there's always a moment in a disaster where you have time to prepare a little bit better. You have time to get ready for a worst case. Now, we could not have possibly known that a 50-year-old record was going to get broken by 40%. And so I'm not talking about that you can always physically prepare for worse than the worst that you're expecting. And it's also, when you think about this example, if we as the utility and the power plants, if we had spent all the money to prepare for breaking the record by 40%, we would have been criticized as being wasteful of customer dollars, right? You have to be prudent in how you're spending and how you're preparing, because if you don't need it, someone has to pay for that, right? So I'm not talking about build all your flood walls twice as high as you want to, right? You can't. What I'm talking about is preparing on paper, prepare mentally. Once you've got the sandbags filled, sit down with your team and say, okay, what if this is not high enough? What if it gets worse? What are we going to do? At what point are we going to pull the crews out of the plants, right? Where are we going to retreat to, right? So figuring out, at least mentally, and it's something that some business cases will call productive paranoia. Turn your fear into preparation. Turn the anxiety of your team into confidence, so that when you're sitting there and you're hunkered down and you hear the wind, okay, these walls might break, but we have a plan B. And so that's something that I took away here, and in 2020 has actually served me quite well, because if we're going to talk about things can always get worse, That certainly is going to be how I'll wrap up my career journey here in just a minute. And I think about all of you and your current experiences. The education experience that you envisioned has now been disrupted at to a level and for a duration that a year ago nobody would have believed, right? And I think that you're probably, and I know you're already building some of these struggle to strength skills today. So I'm going to close out by talking about 2020, and then do a couple of hopefully helpful last pieces of advice, and then we'll turn it over to questions. So my last story here is the most recent, and I couldn't even have just one picture because it's 2020, right? And I think it doesn't need any kind of introduction. But what I'm going to do is share some pertinent statistics that are really relevant to SCE and to what Jessica and I have been going through the last year, that you might not have top of mind. And I think that'll help frame kind of the leadership challenge and the leadership takeaways that we can have from this year. The first on the left side here is wildfire. 5 of the 6 largest wildfires in California history happened in the fall of 2020. The single largest source fire, like a single source fire, not like the lightning complex where it's a bunch of fires, but the largest single source fire in the history of California is the Creek Fire, which happened in September of 2020. That fire was particularly personally damaging to SCE. It took out a 1,000 megawatt hydro facility in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It took that fire out on one of the hottest days on record, right before Labor Day, and in the middle of a heat wave, in the middle of a supply crisis, which we're going to talk about next. And then on top of that, we're dealing with the pandemic. And not only does that challenge our operations, so you think about responding to and restoring during a heat, during a wildfire, you have crews that can't ride in cars together. They have to be single occupancy vehicles because of the pandemic. You have, different PPE that's required, lay down yard spacing that's different. Everything is different because of the pandemic. And the customers are struggling. 10% of our residential customers right now are more than 60 days late on their electric bill. 30,000 small businesses are more than 60 days late in just an SCE service area. We put in protections for our customers at the start of the pandemic because we could see that this was going to be incredibly challenging. And if not for those protections, those customers would have been disconnected. And then rotating outages, and that's the subject of our full case study. So I'm not going to get too much into it, but it's like as if we didn't have enough to deal with. The first time in 20 years, the California Independent System Operator has to use this last resort measure of taking firm load, meaning a customer who wants to be connected to the grid, taking them offline because otherwise worrying about a much more catastrophic impact to the grid because of a shortage of supply. And so my big takeaway from this is that things are not going to get easier, right? When I was in your shoes, when I was in engineering school or graduate school, I used to always look forward to some day on the calendar when I was going to get a break, right? It was the last day of final exams, or it was the day of my senior thesis presentation. There was like always a day in my mind where after that day, I can relax, right? There is no break coming, right? We are right now experiencing the impacts of climate change that we have been warned about for the last 3 decades. They are here and they are making everything worse. And it means that where we need to focus is not on how do we get a break, but instead, how do we grow our capability to deal with emotional and physical stress? How do we get our teams in a mode where we can go from crisis to crisis, or in this case, 3 crises all at the same time? That is where we have to be focused, not on, okay, 2021 is going to be better than 2020, because it's not. It's not. It's going to get harder. And we have to also, as leaders, make sure that we are focused on the health of our teams and the health of ourselves, right? Making sure that we're keeping our eyes out for burnout and exhaustion, because we're going to get through this crisis, and then the next one, it's just going to layer on top of each other until we can get all the way through this to the other side of a carbon-free, clean energy economy, which I completely believe in. I believe we are building for my future, my children's future. And it's going to take all of you to be part of that with us, but it's going to take a decade or more before we're on the other side of this. And so I'm going to close with 3 suggestions that help me get through this period of constant crises, and what I call coming up for air, because we have to be able to, come up for air, restore our own, capability so we can dive back in and keep up with the fight. And the first one is, around passion for the job that you've chosen. I love my job. I love working in energy. I totally believe in electrification and fighting climate change, and that we are going to make this world a better place. And that helps me get through these rough times, because I feel like every 18-hour day or whatever I'm putting in, and I don't work 18 hours every day, but there were definitely days on this page here that I did, that it's worth it, right? So having a passion for what you do is so important. The second thing that I take away from these is learn from your mistakes. Because when you are stressed, when things are moving really fast, when you don't have enough time that you want because it's, hitting you over and over again, you're going to make mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes throughout all those examples, but especially in 2020. And one thing that I do is I open up a Word document and I title it Lessons Learned as soon as the crisis hits. So as soon as we did our first drop of customers during rotating outage, I opened a Lessons Learned rotating outage document, so that every time I see, oh, we should have done that, oh, I should have done that, I wish I had already had this communication plan written, I wish we had figured out this in advance, I drop it in my Word document, I press save, and I put my head back in the game. And so instead of focusing on, oh, we messed that up, we didn't do this fast enough, I'm like, oh, lesson learned captured for the next time. And rotating outage is a good example, because we went through it in the middle of August. We went through my lessons learned document. Jessica was part of that. We had all these lessons learned conversations. And 2 weeks later, we were back in the middle of it again. And so it was actually great that we learned from all those mistakes in August, and we were able to get through September without dropping customers. And then the last one is establishing your wellness metrics. And this is going to sound very corporate, KPIs, metrics, and all that. But I look at it as I think I've painted maybe kind of a dire picture here, right? Climate change impacts are here. It's going to be a difficult decade, crisis after crisis. But success is going to require that, you take your own wellness and your own safety really seriously. And I take my wellness and my team's wellness very seriously. And there's things that, I'm a quant engineer person, so I love numbers and metrics, and that, makes me feel better. So I actually have a list of metrics that I think about when I think about how am I doing. I run or jog for the way that I exercise and deal with stress. So I track, am I hitting my miles per week? Or am I getting so engrossed in work that I'm letting my exercise slide? I do the same thing with books. I love to read, which is so funny, that was in my introduction. And I know that if I'm prioritizing my own mental health and stepping away from work enough, I know that I will read 9 books a quarter. And so every 3 months, if I haven't read 9 books, I'm like, I'm disappointed. I'm making more time going forward. It's a metric for me. I'll be even more transparent. I think about, am I having too many glasses of wine to relax at the end of the day? Or should I be going to bed earlier? Because I know on a good night's sleep, everything is less stressful. So now I'm not saying that you need to be OCD and start counting every ounce of water that you're drinking every day, though water is another good metric. But think about what makes you who you are. how do you know that you're taking care of yourself? What are things that you enjoy about life? Maybe it's hiking or traveling post-pandemic or whatever it is. And make sure that you're keeping track in some way of how much you're holding on to that and investing in yourself versus letting all of the rest of this consume you. Because we need you. We need your knowledge and your creativity and your energy, and we need you in this fight, but we're going to need you at your best. And so make sure that you are still taking care of yourself, because I think we're going to get through this decade, but it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take all of us, at our best. So that's my journey, and I left time for hearing from everyone else, how they're doing, and any questions or things you want me to talk more about.
Well, first of all, I just really want to take a moment to thank you for sharing that with us. And we're still trying to figure out how our class is going to do appreciation, in a virtual environment. So there's jazz hands, there's like claps like this, snaps. So hopefully you're getting a bunch of that from our students. So, and I think they're really looking forward to the case later today. We do have other members of the EEI community that are listening in as well. And so I want to open it up. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left for this session. And I want to open it up for folks to be able to ask you questions in response to your talk, and also just generally about kind of
anything.
Yeah. So I have some questions already, but I want to make sure students have a chance to do that. And then also, if you want to put it into chat, you're welcome to do that. So I'm going to open up my chat so I can.
Yeah, can I see the chat there?
You should be able to see the chats as well.
Okay, yeah, I can see it.
And so they may ask you directly, or they may put it to everyone, or they may do it, send it to me. But does anybody have any questions they want to share? The first one I have is, and I know this is not necessarily directly on topic, but which is your favorite book of the last quarter that you read, or which that you would most recommend?
Oh, just in the last quarter?
Well, I guess the last year.
Okay, yeah, sure. So right before the pandemic, I read a book called Becoming Bulletproof by a woman who was a Secret Service agent. And I've thought about that book all year because it's really practical tips for the everyday person on how to have like better situational awareness, how to have more mental toughness, and I've taken some of those tips. Like she talks about making sure wherever you are, if you're traveling, you know where the closest police station is, making sure your kids know how to get to the police station or get to the fire station. And so I have implemented some of her suggestions, but as we went into this pandemic, right after reading it, it took on a whole new meaning for me, because she really talks about how the human, because the very beginning of her book is riveting. Like you can't put it down in the beginning, because she was at ground zero on September 11th and helped like in the response after the building collapsed, and even got trapped in the building for a little bit. So she talks about how like we can survive anything, but you have to go into it with that intention to survive. And then she is not political at all, because she served multiple presidents, and she talks a little behind the scenes about like foreign trips and getting ready for big events. So I thought it was fascinating. Becoming Bulletproof.
All right, I'm going to add that to my list here. So this is going to be kind of along those lines. When we think about kind of all the crises that you kind of laid out, and lessons learned, what do you think about redundancy, and how important that can be in setting us up for success in response to those crises? And so it sounds like, Becoming Bulletproof gives you some mental tools to offer some redundancy. But I'm thinking specifically when we talk about the energy system, there's a big push towards electrification, and we're doing lots of market research and R&D here at UC Davis on some of those topics. At the same time, there's those challenges, here in New York, that is all electric. SCE is all electric company, and so how can you, as we increase our reliance on electricity, how do we build into, whether that's systems, whether it's hard technology or programs, how do we really think about building redundant systems to help us be more resilient?
Well, it's something we think about a lot. And one thing that's working in our favor is the technology and the customer adoption of the distributed generation, both storage, solar, and then if you think about electric vehicles as being distributed storage, works directly in our favor towards redundancy. Because if we think about the big disruption that we had during wildfires can take out a whole power plant like we've seen. They can take out critical transmission systems. That when you've got more sources closer to load as an operator, you actually have a lot more flexibility. So I think redundancy in the system itself is an important part of how we're going to be building the clean energy future. But I also think about redundancy, let me take it in a little different turn. Think about redundancy on your team and where people's skills are and their capabilities, because we can, like in these examples, you might have now your best experts deployed to respond to the wildfire. And then at the same time, now you've got another emergency. And so making sure that we have a really deep bench, that we've got people who can play in different roles, I think is an important part of what we're going to have to deal with in the future. We can't just have battery experts and solar experts and market experts. Like, we're going to need people who are going to be able to go across those different areas.
Yeah, that's we haven't gotten to a point where the reliance on electric vehicles are such, right, that that's another example. Like, we're going to see a whole new kind of realm there, right? So talk about multiple roles, but you can think about our next the case study next week is with Curtis Wynn, who's with NRECA, and it's on bidirectional charging. And so the idea of using kind of vehicles as a way to kind of provide that redundancy, but you're talking about kind of different, making sure your team is diversified in terms of their skill set, same kind of thing. Can you use these different assets? Really, really interesting. I see a question from Lorea. Go ahead.
Oh, is it in the chat?
No, she's she raised her hand.
Great.
Hi, good morning. So I just had a question about, have you guys or SC as a whole implemented additional ways to communicate with customers since the pandemic started? And if so, what kind of impact do you think that's had with them?
That is very top of mind for us right now, because I'll tell you, we've seen pros and cons. So we are always trying to get customers to make sure that we have their latest contact information so that we can give them alerts and notifications. We do text messages, we do obviously emails, we do robocalls. We will try to hunt you down, right? We got creative going into 2020, and we've got a partnership with Google where we can do alerts so that even if you're not a customer of SCE, but if your cell phone is in a geographic area where we need to get you a message, it says, I'm going to turn power off to this area. We can send alert to your phone that way. We can send an alert to people based on their zip code, even if because if you think about, like, we have 5 million accounts, but we serve more than 15 million people. Because in a household, you're only going to have one person's name on the account, but there's a bunch of people who live in there who also need that information. So we went into 2020, I think, kind of on the leading edge of being able to reach customers who aren't even like registered customers, but we know they use our product. The pros and cons, the downside is too much communication or communication that isn't specifically targeted at an address, like these geographic alerts, have caused some confusion, because some customers will be getting an alert and it's actually not their circuit that is being de-energized, but they are in the vicinity of the area. And now they think they're going to lose power at their own house, but they're actually not. It's just because of where they were when we were sending the notices. So we do not have it perfect. And I think this is an area where technology and figuring out how to have better partnerships with, mobile phones and social media and others, I think will help us. But we are trying, and so we're open to ideas. I don't know if Jessica has anything else on that too, because I know her team does a lot to reach out to some of our most vulnerable customers as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I will just add, using one example, the text messaging tactic of sending text messages to all of our customers that are eligible for our low income programs. We sent out a text message to most all of our low income customers, and we had such a huge surge of enrollments in our low income rate reduction program. So it's really interesting, as Jill said, she likes numbers. So it's really cool to see this graph just kind of going up, up, up after all those text messages went out. So really satisfying to see that cause and effect.
May I ask a follow-up question? For the, so you said you send out more messages to low income. Is it because they can take advantage of the benefits? You want them to get, like, be able to take advantage of the program benefits, or is it for another reason?
Yeah, I can take that. Definitely, because we've already kind of pre-profiled that they would be eligible for our low-income programs. And with COVID and the impacts, we want to make sure that all of our customers that are eligible can take advantage of these programs, ones that we already have and ones that we've created because of COVID.
Awesome, thank you.
I have a question that's come in from the chat, which is, has there been a change in power consumption pattern due to the pandemic as people are staying home and lots of big office spaces and small businesses have closed? And then I have a follow on to that, which is, how has that impacted kind of the potential for peak demand?
Yeah,
So,
I have the exact answers. I saw that come in the chat, so I pulled it up.
yeah.
So overall, we've seen about an 8% increase in residential and about a 9% decrease in non-residential or commercial. And since non-residential commercial tends to be a little bit of a larger load, when you look at the whole system, we've seen about a 2% decline. So people are using more power at home, their bills are higher, but because the office parks and others are closed, the whole system has seen generally a lower peak or lower total consumption. We have seen some changes in the peak. You see a lot later energy uses in residential than you do with commercial, because commercial often pre-cools, gets in at 5 or 6 in the morning, starts up their buildings. You don't see that morning ramp as much as we've got more people in residential. So we saw in August and September, which we'll talk about in the case, a sustained use of home air conditioning load that definitely contributed to peak, because you had more people home, you had a higher heat loading in the house. And so we have seen impacts because of it that have affected not just regionally, but at the statewide level. What was your follow-on, Ben? The peak was the follow-on.
Yeah, the peak. I was interested in that, and yeah, if that impacts resiliency issues, but we'll be talking about that. One follow-on question that I don't think went to everyone was just, do you have wellness metrics that you've implemented, not just for yourself, you shared, but for your team as well?
So we do a pulse survey every quarter. We survey a quarter of our employees, and we ask questions about productivity. We ask questions about, are they checking in with their manager? How are they feeling about the company? So we watch the pulse survey results pretty closely as one indication if we're starting to see some issues. We also do safety moments and safety stand downs, we call them, or I don't know if stand downs or stand ups, but we just did one last week on COVID, because we've seen quite a surge in Southern California. It's had a direct impact on our workforce. And so we do a pause, and basically all 13,000 employees will stop what they're doing and spend time with their team talking about that issue of the moment. And we've done those on multiple occasions so that we can give people, the space and the breathing room to think, talk about what's going on, how are they dealing with it, how are you staying safe?
That's great. I see one question that did come through the chat. It's one of our students about and I'm interested in this as well, is recent stimulus bill included increased funding for energy initiatives. Still not sure what's going to ultimately get passed, but how do you envision federal kind
Yeah.
of impacts to SCE?
I would say we're obviously very positive about what we're seeing as clean energy commitments at the federal level. Just the fact that we won't have to be defending the vehicle standards that California has pioneered and other states have followed with the zero emission vehicles. In the last 4 years, we've been fighting that with the federal administration, and that's sucked up a lot of resources. And so basically that evaporates now, and we're happy about that because it allows the states to continue to be very aggressive with setting stronger standards for transportation. I think that I'm incredibly excited about a carbon-free 2035 vision and what that's going to mean. We saw out of the December stimulus a lot of continued support for renewable energy. I think there's more that people are looking for from this administration around supporting storage, extending vehicle tax credits. There's definitely additional opportunities.